I am pleased to welcome my next guests back to the show. We've done so many broadcasts with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and we are joined here on the eve of the 21st anniversary. Hard to believe that much time has gone by. Barbara Honegger is with us, Richard Gage, and Bruce Lichty from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Hello, Barbara. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, hi. Great to be back.
Wonderful to see you. And we've got also Bruce and Richard with us. We're using Zoom today, so as each person speaks, they will appear on screen. Richard, would you like to begin? I know you have some announcements you want to make about an upcoming symposium. Where should we begin?
Well, there are a number of great events this week. I would start chronologically, actually, on behalf of my former firm that I founded 15 years ago, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which I'm no longer with, but I'm working with my wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. But our AE 9/11 Truth is producing excellent content. And they have a symposium themselves on Friday, September 9, and that is happening on their website, which is ae911truth.org. The next day is Saturday, September 10th. And Barbara, you should tell us about the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, exciting day there.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody, and thanks so much for having us back on again. It's wonderful to be able to inform your audience about all the exciting things that are happening at the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry on 9/11 Truth and Accountability this past year and going forward. So the big news for now is that the Lawyers Committee's online free 9/11 anniversary event will be this Saturday, September 10. Beginning at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern. It will go for just 4 hours. We'll be over at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. And we have really exciting speakers for you. We have a number of the attorneys and board members of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry on very exciting topics. And we also have world famous and nationally famous attorney Daniel Sheehan, who is on the Lawyers Committee Advisory Committee, and he will be speaking on what it takes to win historic cases. He is the attorney for, amongst others, the famous New York Times Pentagon Papers case, the Iran-Contra case, the Karen Silkwood case, and many others. So Danny will be speaking as well. We're also going to have Christopher Goya, this is all in addition to our Lawyers Committee board members on different topics. And so Christopher Goya, former New York fireman and fire commissioner, will be speaking. And Eric Lawyer, who is the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, will be speaking. And we're just really excited about the event. We want everybody to go to our website, which is LC. That's Larry Charlie. So LCFOR911.org. And it'll be obvious on that homepage what to click on to register for the event and see everything about it, including all of the speakers and their bios and their photos and where you register and sign up. And you will get an email with the link to the Zoom the morning of the event, which is this Saturday, September 10th. So that's really exciting. And I'll turn it back over to Richard as for any other events.
Sure.
I have a few other events to mention myself, but go ahead.
We have September 11th, the 21st anniversary of 9/11, and it will be a film festival online, live streamed right here from richardgage911.org. We will have live guests, James Corbett of the Corbett Report, introducing the world premiere of his film, False Flags, The Secret History of Al-Qaeda. And part 3 is what's unique here. So we'll be showing part 2 at the event. But also we've been informed in the 9/11 Truth movement that David Ray Griffin, the grandfather of the 9/11 truth movement, if you will, has let us know that he only has a couple of months to live due to cancer. So we're going to honor his life and his work while he's still with us. So we'll be focusing a lot on David Ray Griffin as well. And to that end, we'll be bringing Elizabeth Woodworth, who has been his right-hand person for over a decade. And we'll be talking about the 9/11 consensus panel, the best evidence across all of the swath of 9/11 attack activities that we bring all collectively the truth to light about. So that's real exciting too, and we can get into more efforts that we've been up to individually. But
and then I have a few other events to add to. Richard, do you want to give your website for people to go to?
RichardGage911.org.
That's where you find out how to watch Richard's 9/11 Film Festival with exciting speakers as well. Other events people should know about. This year, it will not be live streamed. It will not be online. It will be in person only, but at the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, California, on the 12th. There will be the 9/11 Film Festival. That's an in-person event. And that's also got a lot of exciting films for those who are in the central to northern area of California, if you can survive the heat to get there. It's 106 where I am right now.
Don't charge your electric car.
You charge your electric car. And also very exciting, our colleagues in the Europe-wide 9/11 Truth Movement group are putting on a very exciting, believe it or not, 12-hour-long live in-person event in Utrecht, Belgium, on September 10th, their time. There's a 6-hour difference from the East Coast and a 9-hour difference from the West Coast. And so their event ends, thankfully and coincidentally, literally as the Lawyers Committee event begins, so that their audience will be able to continue to stay in the theater or outdoors, wherever it's being held, I'm not sure, and continue to watch our event, which is very exciting, and we arranged it that way. So the Lawyers Committee event ends at 8 p.m. Eastern, and their event begins literally then. Actually, their event begins at 9 p.m. Eastern. So our event, we originally thought would be 5 hours, but it's going to be about 4, maybe a little bit over. So they'll be able to go have a bite to eat and then watch the Lawyers Committee event. There are other events. Kevin Barrett, who is a longtime 9/11 truth activist, researcher, professor, and scholar, is putting on an event with Ron Unz in Michigan, Wisconsin. Madison's in Wisconsin, not Michigan, right? Anyway, near Madison. And that is not going to be live streamed, but the link for it will be posted on Kevin Barrett's Substack page shortly after the event. And that's also a very exciting event. Ron Unz has been a 9/11 researcher and activist and publicist for a number of years now. A little bit late to 9/11 Truth, but boy, did he come into it big when he saw the light. And he's just published 6 new books that involve 9/11 Truth. All are in part. So he's going to be talking about the content of those books at that event. I think that's probably it for the events, unless I forgot.
That's something. A lot of events.
Yeah.
I like it that you guys have located a firefighter with the last name Lawyer. That's serendipitous.
Yeah, right.
Eric Lawyer founded Firefighters for 9/11 Truth.
Right.
He's been at it for years and years, and most recently, the Protecting Our Protectors Alliance. And he and the Boston 9/11 Truth Group and a captain from the Seattle Firefighter Department went to Boston, and we had quite a evidence display booth to wake up fire protection engineers to what's happening relative to Building 7. That was incredible.
And that was this year, right, Richard?
Yeah.
Forgive me if this is silly, but I think it would be excellent, perhaps, to add this attorney whose last name is Fireman.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I was going to say, too bad we don't have an attorney whose last name is Fireman.
Oh my God.
Problem
Come on,
solved.
how did you do
You
that?
got
You
too
are so
much
fast.
time on your hands, Jason.
Maybe you can reach out to him for us, Jason. We need more attorneys on our board.
Yeah,
You
we do,
never
don't
know. You never know.
We do. And I did want to inject a little bit of comic relief because, of course, when we're talking about 9/11, this is one of the most upsetting things to ever occur. And each of you have been fighting for truth for the past 21 years. If we're ready to turn things over to Bruce, I think people might want to hear a little bit about how he represented victims' families and what the outcome was there. We want to talk a little bit during this interview about the victories and what's planned for the future, successes and future planned successes. Bruce, what can you tell us about what's gone on?
Okay, well, I'll start with just a very brief synopsis of what happened when I represented Ellen Mariani, who was the widow of Louis Neal Mariani, who the last time she saw him was before he boarded, well, I guess they took separate flights, but the last they knew of him was he boarded flight 175. And then she litigated as part of the very conventional litigation that was brought early on against the security companies, the airlines, and various Port Authority, et cetera. And so I got into that case quite late when she had been frustrated. Her whole intention and effort was to try to get discovery as to what really happened to her husband, since she became increasingly convinced that she wasn't getting the proper story, as many of the widows did from the government. And so I got involved at a very late stage, and we tried to get discovery. We were up against a brick wall with Judge Alvin Hellerstein in the Southern District of New York. He wouldn't even let me be admitted in that court, which is kind of unprecedented. Basically used the fact that she had been given bad advice early on and had got herself out of the case, although she did have good arguments to regain access, which I insisted on making. Anyway, to make a long story short, there was a lot of litigation, ended up in front of the Second Circuit, just a lot of politics that she ran into there. And it was, the only thing that I established well, I shouldn't say the only thing, but one of the things that I established during that time was that the one of the represented plaintiffs, all these victims, the family members, indicated at one point that they did learn that, or that he was prepared to admit that there was a question asked about remote control ability to commandeer the planes that Boeing supposedly had. I think the question was, they posed the question, why wasn't that used to land the planes when there were hijackers? So I thought that was intriguing. This was a fairly early stage, and I don't know if there's been formal admission since that time that the planes were even equipped with that. I think they're probably denials, in fact. But at least that was an intriguing little bit of information that I've always wished we could follow up on. But anyway, the Lawyers Committee
Let me slow you down for a second, Bruce, because you're covering a lot of material here, and I don't think everybody is familiar with what you're talking about. As far as being admitted to the court, you're in California, you're admitted to the bar in California, and it's very standard practice for attorneys to seek admission to courts outside of their normal jurisdiction through a pro hoc vice application. And it's my understanding that the rules surrounding pro hoc vice have been loosened recently, such that it's much easier for out-of-state lawyers to appear in courts than it was previously. Why did Hellerstein not allow you to come in?
Well, he never explained it, other than the fact that he said Ellen Mariani already lost her standing to even appear in this case. So this is an argument that you can increasingly hear, is that people don't have standing. The courts will try to get rid of you that way. Of course, she did have standing, because what she was trying to do, and what she did eventually do on her own then, was bring a motion to intervene or to regain her foothold as a widow of a person who had a claim that was cognizable. But they weren't going to let me appear, because I believe that they rightly sensed that I would make things more difficult for the lubricated settlement. That was the word of Judge Hellerstein at one point. Money is the universal lubricant, to try to get rid of all these family members. So.
Wow. That's some pretty interesting language there. And am I incorrect that so many of these statutes, even though she might have lost standing, don't these things sort of almost always include language that says, unless justice is served by doing such and such, so that a judge could say, you know what, this woman's husband was killed, and yeah, there's this technicality over here, but she really should be allowed to litigate this. We're going to let her do it.
Well, I mean, there may well be in that particular rule. We didn't even need to rely on that. I mean, the rule was clear that anybody is supposed to have the right to intervene, and if they have the right to intervene, they have the right to bring a motion. Strike down the motion if you will, but at least give them counsel to be able to bring the motion. So it was totally clear that she had that right to counsel to make that motion. She had been a party previously in the action, and she was given bad advice from some connected, one of whom was very Clinton connected, Paul McEachern, attorney in New Hampshire, that she really would be better served if she turned it over to an administrator of her husband's estate, the whole thing, including her loss of consortium claim as a widow. Well, that really wasn't discussed, but that was the leverage we tried to use later to get back into it. But she had been convinced to give that all over to this person who was the son of an OSS officer. That came out or later too. So yeah, there was a den of thieves there that, in my view, helped squash her in that particular action. But anyway, that's not something that the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry specifically is concerned with at this point. That's just my background.
Forgive me for interrupting, but it's extremely interesting because this is sort of like from the trenches on the ground. Like, this is what the families, the victims, that's what they were experiencing, is getting shut down by courts. And you're talking about how somebody convinced her of something. I believe the patent you were talking about is this Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. Boeing was awarded a patent for this in 2006. And obviously, it takes a certain amount of time to apply for and get a patent. And you need to first develop and test this technology. And I think there are a lot of people who believe that this technology was in place on Boeing aircraft at the time. It's interesting that the court wouldn't allow you to probe this.
Well, I'd like to add that, yes, we do know that it was available to Boeing at the time. And there's a relatively new organization, it's been around for just a few years, called is it Pilots for 9/11 Truth, Richard? It's Dan Hanley's organization. Is that the title?
No, it's got a different title. I'll think of it.
Anyway, there's a new organization of a number of
911pilots.org.
Pilots.org. Yeah.
9/11 pilots. Yeah, we know Dan. He's been on the show many times.
Yeah. Okay, Dan Hanley. And that's what he focuses on. He's trying to get the attention of the governments around the world, not just the U.S., but all major governments, that this uninterruptible autopilot, the remote control apparatus, was in fact on some Boeing aircraft on 9/11. And of course, he believes that is part of the reality of what happened to the planes, at least 3 of them on 9/11.
Yeah. Dan's done a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know there's a lot of other legal action that has gone on. I think, Richard, you had some stuff you wanted to share with us about the status of various things.
Well, yeah, let's go to Bruce, who can share relative to the legal efforts by him and the other attorneys at Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and on behalf of Mick, the litigation director at Lawyers Committee. Bruce, why don't you update us on exciting developments there?
So let me, excuse me, I will certainly try to start, and you and Barbara may be able to fill in. I'm a relative, this is one of the challenges of the board at this point. So I have my own law practice, basically a civil litigation practice. And Mick Harrison, our litigation director, is really the only person who has been able to devote considerable time to actually doing litigation on behalf of Lawyers Committee tasks. So I sit on the board and I become aware of things to some degree. I'm not as astute as Mick, certainly. So I feel like I'm kind of a pinch hitter, and he would have hit a home run here. Maybe I can hit a single or two. But the one of the things that's intriguing is, and the Lawyers Committee, if I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, has been, because I've been on the board for about a year, a little less, we've been focusing on evidence of the bombings and how to actually confirm that from some of the government's own records. So, for instance, there's a Freedom of Information Act request that was made a long time ago by a then board member, and that's been in litigation, and that's one of the recent successes or about to be successes. I mean, there's been some partial successes already, but that was aimed at FEMA to get them to uncover, to produce documents related to the building performance study, which they were obliged to do. So they completely stonewalled that, turned it over to NIST. They had said they turned over all their documents to NIST, the National Institute for Standards Technology, or something like that.
Right.
So that's been in litigation, and we have recently won some victories in terms of being able to take discovery on the very poor document production that was produced there. And I think just today, in fact, Mick has filed a motion for summary judgment, believing very strongly that we will get an order from the court requiring them to do a better search, because we have all kinds of evidence of contradictions and lies and misrepresentations on the part of some of the NIST folks, perhaps FEMA too. But it's clear that they did not, I mean, it's clear from their own admissions, basically, they didn't do the search that they told us they had done.
The document search, you mean?
The document search, correct. So we're on the verge of getting what we believe could be important documents. There should be some evidence of the kind of structural damage that could have been related to, or is definitely related to, bombing in those records. There should at least be some discussion about it, we believe. And so that's one of the things we're hopeful for. Another.
Could I add something there, Bruce?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify. Bruce used the word bombings, and that's actually appropriate for a new FOI lawsuit that Mick Harrison, our litigation director, is filing today or tomorrow at the latest. And that is against the FBI for its major bombing cases records. And they use the word bombing cases themselves. But in the case of the FOI lawsuit in DC District Court, I believe it is, that Bruce was just talking about, I believe it would be probably more accurate to describe those documents that we know that they said they didn't have, but they did, and we're trying to get, that some of them, there's reason to believe from what we already have and know, that some of them probably include evidence that they were not willing to give up and didn't want us to have originally, evidence of incendiaries and perhaps even explosive incendiaries in the World Trade Center towers and World Trade Center 7. So I think incendiaries, explosives and incendiaries is probably a better term for that. But we are about to file a case against the FBI, an FOI lawsuit, in the next day or two at the most, for what they themselves call their major bombing records cases. That includes videos, that includes text documents, that includes CDs, that includes emails, that includes photos, that includes everything. In one instance, we learned that there were almost 500,000 such documents that are still under lock and key by our government, relevant. Whether they're not all, of course, going to be relevant to explosions or incendiaries or explosive incendiaries, but there are a lot of documents that they're just sitting on. And then I would just like to end and turn it back over to Bruce and Richard to remind people that the official code name for the FBI's entire 9/11 investigation, which, believe it or not, they claim is still going on. That's their excuse for not releasing a bunch of documents, but it's ridiculous after 21 years. But the code name for their entire 9/11 investigation is PENTBOM, PENTTBOM, with a BOM standing for BOMB, Pentagon, Twin Towers, and bombings. That's their official code name. So I'll turn it back to Bruce.
Whoa. Well, before we turn it back over to the gentleman, let me just remind everybody that they can support the efforts of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry by going to the website lcfor911.org and clicking on the Donate tab, where you can send an amount of money of your choice via PayPal. And it is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. This is important work that takes a lot of money, filing these things and keeping law offices and all this work going. So I hope the Crowdsource the Truth viewers will help the Lawyers Committee get this work done. That is astounding. I think I have heard that before, that PENTBOM is the name.
Yeah, just look it up.
Unbelievable.
And thank you, Jason, for asking people to donate. I will say, without giving any confidences up, that the Lawyers Committee is at a really critical turning point. You might be hearing a little bit more about that on the rest of the show here in a few minutes. And we especially now need your generous donations. We really urgently need them. So thank you for whatever you can do.
Absolutely. PENTBOM, unbelievable.
PENTBOM.
Richard?
Pretty incredible.
That's your cue.
I was
Take it away.
Something was going on over there. So what have we been doing here at Richard Gage 9/11 over the last year since we became unleashed, if you will, from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth? My wife and I have been very busy. She's my faithful assistant, and I am unbelievably blessed because I couldn't do this without her. So we together are full time. We've had 75 video podcasts with guests that are experts in and around the 9/11 truth movement. And we're reaching beyond 9/11 and into the realm of the COVID pandemic as well, because we've found that we've got to produce evidence to the people that are waking up in the COVID movement, the medical freedom and health movement. Because
Richard, could you give a disclaimer about this for the Lawyers Committee?
Well, we have lawyers here from the Lawyers Committee. I'm on the board of the Lawyers Committee, but I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of the Lawyers Committee. Thank you, Barbara. And I'm speaking on behalf of Richard Gage 9/11. That's what you get when we bring everybody on board. You get a smorgasbord. And I just want to share that I've been fascinated to present all over the place recently the truth about 9/11 to the medical freedom community. And these movements are cross-pollinating. And so people in the 9/11 truth community in some large measure are not quite woken up about COVID either. So this has been very fruitful and gives me personally a lot of reason for hope. I've had Dr. Merrill Nass and Dr. Lee Merritt, Dr. Andrew Kaufman on my own podcast, and it's been awesome. But we're not going to focus on COVID on September 11th. It is a 9/11 specific event that we're putting together. But I just wanted to mention that because it's a new development and it's pregnant with possibilities. I think we're going to be expanding the awareness and the waking up of the American people really fast, and primarily as a result of the overplay of their hand relative to COVID and the diabolical solutions that have been put forth to us for that.
Can I add something to that, Richard?
Sure.
Yeah, back to the Lawyers Committee now. There is a link between what Richard was just referring to as his event, that is his own event, Richard Gage, 911.org, his film festival with speakers on September 11th. But back to the Lawyers Committee, which Richard is on the board as well of the Lawyers Committee separately from that. And there is a link to what the Lawyers Committee has already done, big time, to this other new development that Richard was talking about. And that is our work on the anthrax attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because many people have, in fact, probably 99.9% of the American and world public believes the official lie that there was no anthrax knowledge or expectation or fear or responses to anthrax or potential anthrax attacks on the day of 9/11 itself. That the official story is that the government had absolutely no idea that anthrax was involved in any way until almost 3 weeks later or so, on October 4th or 5th, when the first person to die, Robert Stevenson in Florida, died of anthrax that the FBI claims was probably in a letter that was given to him, although they claim they didn't recover that letter. So that's not true. And the Lawyers Committee has now filed 2 petitions, 2 extensive evidentiary-based evidentiary supplement petitions, one with the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, with a copy to the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and the other to the U.S. Congress, which was personally delivered by mail or email to all 535 members of the House and the Senate combined. And our anthrax petition, with its attached evidentiary exhibits, includes the facts, many facts, about the fear and actual responses to the expectation that anthrax was involved as part of the attacks on 9/11 itself. And I'll just give 2 examples, and would send people to the Lawyers Committee website, where you can see all of our legal filings on the website. And that's, again, lcfor911.org. And just 2 tips of the iceberg for you to wake you up about the fact that the anthrax attacks, which after all were a bioweapon attack, the major one of them against the US Congress, because the most lethal and bioengineered anthrax was in the letters to 2 members of Congress, the very 2 Democratic senators, Leahy and Daschle, who were trying to prevent or delay the Patriot Act, which has taken away so many of our constitutional freedoms since 9/11 on the pretext you've attacked us on 9/11. So 2 of those tip of the icebergs prove that the US government at the absolutely highest levels expected and feared that anthrax was involved in the attacks of the day of 9/11 itself. Number 1, many people already know, but not a lot, that Vice President Cheney's White House staff was put on a week's regime, at least a week's regime, of anti-anthrax Cipro antibiotic on 9/11 itself, and a more recent filing of myself and others in the movement, including Dr. Heiko Schöning, who just has published a book in German called Game Over in Europe, and it's about to come out in English. So look for it on Amazon.com, called Game Over, by Dr. Heiko, Heiko Schöning, Schoning. And we have uncovered, myself, Dr. Schöning, and others, more recently, that on the afternoon or early evening of 9/11 itself, on Air Force One, President George W. Bush, his entire White House staff representatives on the plane, the pilot, the co-pilot, and all of the military officers and staff on Air Force One were all also put on anti-anthrax Cipro on the plane as President Bush was being flown from Offutt Air Force Base back to Washington, D.C. to give his approximate 8 p.m. White House address on the night of 9/11. So we have effectively all of the White House staff of both the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States and the President and the Vice President on at least a week's regime of anti-anthrax Cipro on 9/11. The big question is why. So come to our event, the Lawyers Committee event, this Saturday, September 10th, and my presentation is going to be on the anthrax links to the day of 9/11 itself. So I'll turn it back over.
Wow, that's quite a lot. If I may interject, We've done a presentation on the anthrax evidence previously, and Mick, and I think you were on that broadcast,
I was on,
Barbara,
yes.
presented some very compelling evidence, and you've just said something extremely important, that it was bioengineered anthrax. And we know that from
Correct.
the evidence that you guys have presented. I believe they were telling us that anthrax, as it occurs naturally, has a tendency to stick together and then go dropping to the ground. And unless you're messing around with cattle, although anthrax can be very deadly, you're just not that likely to get it. And this
Well, this was this
aerosolized
anthrax, Jason, the
came
anthrax
from
in
a
the
lab.
letters, even the less bioengineered anthrax, but especially the anthrax, the most bioengineered anthrax that was given to Senators Leahy and Daschle in letters that were mailed in late September, early October, as I recall. But anyway, after 9/11, those letters were mailed. That anthrax was so bioengineered. It was military grade bioengineered anthrax that in the letters to the two senators, Leahy and Daschle, Democratic senators, were trying to mitigate the worst parts of the Patriot Act. At that very time, they got those biowarfare agents in the mail to their staffs in their office in Congress. That was so bioengineered that the anthrax not only didn't stick together, but it was like a gas. So that when someone opened the letter in their offices, the anthrax burst out of the letters literally into the entire building, not just their offices.
Right, this aerosolized version
Aerosolized
of
anthrax
is extremely dangerous. It's also interesting to note that of those members, Daschle left. He didn't run for re-election. Leahy remained and was pretty involved in the Trump impeachment. We see our current president with the very questionable former attorney general smiling like dopes in this picture. I wonder what they each know. There's a lot to be learned, so people should definitely tune in to hear that information and evidence about the anthrax. It's just really astounding. And you know, the other thing that I wanted to bring up, Barbara, when you talk about this being engineered in a lab, we're talking about gain of function. You know, by making the anthrax into an aerosolized pathogen, it's much more deadly. Anything that increases the infectiveness or, you know, the ability for this stuff to be weaponized, super duper dangerous. I don't know if we've ever spoken about, you know, you just brought up Air Force One. That's an amazing detail that the people on there were receiving treatment for anthrax almost as if they knew beforehand that something was going to happen. It was
by the way, I should add, I meant to say that the anthrax was passed out on Air Force One on 9/11 to the president and his whole military staff and his White House staff on board while he was flying from Offutt Air Force Base back to DC for his 8 p.m. evening address on 9/11. It was actually passed out on the plane by Bush's own White House physician, Dr. Tubb, T-U-B-B.
Pretty damning evidence, I would say. And when we look at that in the context of this report from the 10th anniversary, where the actual pilot of Air Force One came forward with testimony, this is Colonel Mark Tillman, and he said that he and the crew received a radio message during the flight that said Angel is next. And they were then pursued by an aircraft. I mean, this is amazing. How would someone have the ability to communicate with Air Force One outside of the structure of the U.S. military or the normal communication systems? A lot of very bizarre things happening on 9/11.
By the way, I'll add one thing to that, and then I'll be quiet and let other people talk. But people should know. There is a book called, there's a book, the official book by the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, about 9/11. From its inside information, has been published. It's called Air War Over America. It's a bit pricey. It's on Amazon, but it's worth it. I've got 2 copies if anybody doesn't have the money. And in that book, you learn that that on the, let's see, now I'm blanking. That happens sometimes. What were we just talking about? I have to remember.
Angel is next on Air Force One.
Yeah. Angel is next. Yeah. People, what you learn in that book by the Air Force itself, their official volume about the attacks and the response to the attacks, is that when Bush left the Florida classroom, and he was finally whisked out of there about 9:32 after only about a 2-minute press event. He was taken to his limousine, and the Secret Service was so frightened for his finally, after both World Trade Center towers were attacked already, and he already knew that, the Secret Service just let him sit there in the classroom. But after only 2 minutes of that Florida school press briefing, he was whisked out by a fearful Secret Service, put into the limousine. It went in a kind of random path back to the Sarasota airport, and they refused to allow his fighter escort that had escorted Air Force One to Florida to leave with Air Force One. And so it left, it went almost vertically up into the sky, and then it zigzagged to try to avoid any attacking plane, landed kind of precipitously at Barkswell Air Force Base, and Bush waited there until his old Texas National Guard fighter jet pilots, the only ones he trusted on 9/11, arrived to accompany his plane to Offutt Air Force Base. And you can be certain that they also accompanied his plane back to DC while his White House physician was putting him and everyone on Air Force One on anti-anthrax Cipro.
Wow. And that's in this book.
That's in the Air Force's own book on 9/11 called Air War Over America. It's on Amazon.com.
Did they ever determine who or why they didn't allow? I mean, that's absurd that they would not allow the president's fighter jet.
No, not when you read the book.
Wow.
No. You see, people need to understand, and this is my work on the Pentagon attack, and that's not the focus of this program, but it is relevant to answering your question. And that is, what people don't realize is that when Bush went into the Florida School for the Press event, it was about 9:30, and he was whisked out by the Secret Service about 9:32 and a half, 9:33. All of the evidence in my Behind the Smoke Curtain on YouTube, which is on the Pentagon attack, supports that the real first attack at the Pentagon was in fact at 9:32 and 30 seconds. So immediately after, there was an explosion of some kind, I believe of a plane destroyed by the helipad, but regardless, there was a massive explosion there at 1/2 minute after 9:32. The Secret Service was waiting in the wings while he was in that press event. And when they learned about that through their earplugs, they realized, Jesus, you know what? This thing is real. But they only whisked Bush out after they learned about the Pentagon attack, not after the World Trade Center attacks 1 and 2.
That's amazing. Unbelievable. People are going to want to check out that book. But
Yes.
We still have plenty of time to discuss more of the legal victories. This is very interesting, Barbara. Each of you, we could do
let's go back to
hours.
that. I'm just answering your questions.
No, I know, and they're good answers, and I'm very intrigued by these. Sorry, Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, let me share with you one of the most powerful collaborations between Richard Gage 9/11 and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, because you heard about the 60 exhibits that were submitted to the U.S. Attorney a couple of years ago. Well, they were sued by the Lawyers Committee and plaintiffs, including myself, in a mandamus action to force them, the U.S. Attorney, to reveal to us if, in fact, the special grand jury is been impaneled and is reviewing the evidence. Well, Bruce can tell you that how it works, but essentially we were denied standing, as you have heard about in other cases. So what's happening now is we're saying, okay, we may go to the Supreme Court to appeal that decision, and I hope we do. But in the meantime, we're assembling the greatest body of evidence on the World Trade Center that's ever been assembled in this film series called 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And we are presenting the 60 exhibits and more directly to the grand jurors. We're going to look right into their eye. Will be filmed professionally in Washington, D.C. with a really great camera crew, and bringing experts aboard to testify as well. And all of this will be submitted to the U.S. Attorney and to be given to the grand jurors themselves as well. So this is one of the most important efforts. We'll be filming in September and October, and November for that matter. So this is an effort that we're the September 11th event that I mentioned, the film festival, will be raising funds for a $19,000 goal. And we already have donations amounting to 3,000 or 4,000. Very exciting. We've got a lot of money to raise, so people can donate $100, $500, or $1,000. Is the opportunity at the film festival that we're going to be presenting. But the main thing is to have this film for the grand jurors, but also for the public. It'll be free on YouTube, so for everybody to watch and share, using the credibility of so many experts. It's a great opportunity.
That's very exciting. And of course, it will be on YouTube, but YouTube doesn't generally like facts and things like that. It's important.
I've had 3 platforms, YouTube channels deplatformed because of hate speech. I mean, do I seem like a hateful person to you?
No, you're the least hateful person I've ever met.
Richard is a super nice guy. We've known each other for years now, but please, Richard, 3 deplatformings. We're on Crowdsource the Truth 8 over here. So call me back when you've had 5 more.
Oh my God, he's beat you out, Richard.
That's incredible.
But it's important that people understand the distinction between the Lawyers Committee and Richard Gage 9/11. Contributions made to richardgage911.org are going to go towards the production of the documentary and the work that Richard is doing. So people may want to donate separately to both organizations, and your options for that are available to you here under the Donate tab on richardgage911.org. And you know, as we're speaking right now, each of the panel members, it's clear that even just this effort has been a legal victory in and of itself, because a lot of people could look at what we're talking about today and say, you don't have standing, you didn't get the FOIA thing, this poor woman died before she had any relief with regard to her husband's tragic end. But going through all these roadblocks and having all these judges deny things that they should be giving you, this is part of the legal process. We're uncovering the lawfare that the government uses against we the people, and you guys all represent us.
That's right, and I'd like to add that one of the options for the Lawyers Committee going forward in the 9/11 Truth Movement, and we're going to be asking people who come to our Lawyers Committee Symposium on September 10th online, beginning at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can register and sign up for that at our website, lcfor911.org. Be sure and do it to get the link to the Zoom on this Saturday morning, September 10th. But what's important for people to realize is that the Lawyers Committee is at a turning point, as I mentioned, and we're asking during that event, towards the end of the event, in a special interactive session with those who participate in the Zoom, our viewers, our audience members, for input to where, after they hear where we've been and what our options are going forward, what your ideas, the viewers' ideas are as to where you think, what do you think we should do? What do you think our priorities should be? And one of those possibilities speaks to what you just said. And that is that one of the options, and they're not contradictory options. We could do more than one given the resources which we need. So we thank you for your support. But one of the options is to pull all of this evidence together of what we've already done and how we've been blocked, and how the government over and over and over in all of these 9/11 cases has always said, I'm sorry, even 9/11 family victims, family members, you don't have standing to bring a 9/11 lawsuit at all for anything.
Unbelievable.
In fact, in the most recent one, the government's filing in our appeals, Second Circuit Appeals Court, in our mandamus case on our biggest case, which is the World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 grand jury petition, they told us, this is almost a verbatim quote, the federal government has no obligation under the Constitution or federal law to communicate in any way with any American citizen for any reason.
What?
I mean, if you can imagine. Yes. So one of our options is to pull all of these actions by the government, as well as other evidence that we have, of an ongoing highest level cover-up. And there is a way to do that. I'm not going to say what that case is that we would rest, that would be central to a filing for a massive cover-up by the government itself. But that's one of our options going forward.
Wow. Now, I know that this is not a case that was brought by the Lawyers Committee, but it's peripherally related. We heard just a year ago that after 20 years, some change had allowed the families to actually sue the government of Saudi Arabia. Or what do you know anything about this, or what's going on?
Do we know
with it?
anything about it? I was personally involved with Mick Harrison and the founding president of the Lawyers Committee in making it possible for the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which enabled their case to finally go forward in the courts against Saudi Arabia. We were centrally involved to getting the 28 pages released, which immediately led in late 2016, just before Trump became president, to JASTA being passed. And as a result of JASTA, for the first time in U.S. history, and I believe for the first time in international law history, any foreign government or its agents, covert or overt, under JASTA, can no longer claim sovereign immunity if there is reasonable evidence to go into court that they were complicit in any way in terrorist attack against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. And that's not just against Saudi Arabia. JASTA applies to every foreign country in the world, all of them that are recognized by the United Nations, 195 nations. Unfortunately, the only federal government that isn't covered by JASTA is the United States government, which is the one that really matters.
But this is a huge victory. I don't mean to laugh. This is significant.
It's huge.
For people, it's huge. And so for people who are saying, these guys haven't done anything with 9/11, that is not true. And
it's our biggest victory, getting the 28 pages released, and therefore about 2 weeks later, JASTA passed, which was literally, it's been called a revolution in the foundation of international law. It's huge.
It absolutely is. And if people are watching, maybe don't know about the 28 pages, that's possible. But the 28 pages can be viewed at 28pages.org. These are 28 pages of the original Senate report about 9/11 that were redacted by the U.S. government and were released in 2016, still in a somewhat redacted form, but we've got a lot of information out of these 28 pages. Bob Graham, I believe he's died since this happened.
Did he? I didn't know that.
I could be wrong. Let me check that. But he was a senator, and he was pivotal in getting this released. Senator
by
Bob
the way,
Graham.
It was a joint House and Senate Intelligence Committee, the first official investigation by the U.S. government of 9/11, alleged investigation, cover-up actually, was the joint House Senate investigation on the so-called intelligence failure side. There were no intelligence failures on 9/11. They were part of the plot. But in any case, it was the very first official investigation. The 9/11 Commission was not the first. That was the second.
And forgive me,
Speaking
Senator
of disclaimers,
Graham.
Barb, you might want to make one on that one.
Sorry, Richard.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
Hang on, guys. Sorry. I just want to make sure. Senator Richard Graham is still alive. I apologize to the senator and his family. He's 85,
Bob
living
Graham?
in Florida. Yes, Bob Graham. Sorry.
What is the disclaimer, Richard, you're referring to?
Oh, you just made quite a claim, and I was wondering if you wanted to declare that as a personal opinion.
Well, just remind me which claim you think I should.
Whether intelligence officials were necessarily implicated.
Oh yes, that's my my own personal research, not supported, not confirmed or denied by the Lawyers Committee.
But the 28 pages are critical because they revealed the role of various Saudi Arabian royal family members, government, people from Saudi Arabia, Prince Bandar, etc. I mean, truly shocking information. I think a lot of people, and when I say that, I mean me, still feel like there are people who are exposed in these 28 pages who nothing at all has happened to. What do we think about that?
Well, I'd like to make a comment because my work, especially in the 9/11 Truth Movement, is relevant to answering that question. And that is that most people don't realize, even in the 9/11 Truth Movement, don't realize. And I'm not even sure that many of the 9/11 victims' family members, who are, thousands of them are plaintiffs in these lawsuits against that have been merged against Saudi Arabia for allegedly supporting some of the 9/11 hijackers. The 28 pages are only about 2 of the alleged 19 hijackers, only 2 of the 19. And those 2 happen to, according to the official story, have been on the alleged Pentagon plane. So the 28 pages, and in my personal opinion, the entire case against Saudi Arabia rests upon the truth about the Pentagon attack. That's why it's so important.
Gentlemen, any comment on that?
Not necessarily on that, but you mentioned earlier that there are people frustrated out there, and we know that with the pace of progress. There certainly have been a lot of rebuffs in the legal system, and part of what you said, I think, is very true. Part of what we're doing is consciousness raising so that a groundswell continues to grow in this country, because that may be the only way to ultimately address some of these things. Grand juries, we're not certain if they're getting the information on crimes that they're supposed to be getting under federal statute. It's a huge frustration at this point. The judge who wrote the opinion of the Second Circuit is the cousin, or at least related closely, to George Bush, John Bush, or John Walker, I believe is his name.
John Walker.
John Walker. And so it appears to be there's at least a possibility of, and this is not an official lawyer's committee position either, but collusion and cooperation at that level to make sure that there are legal pretexts trotted out to make sure that things are not addressed by the way that they're supposed to be under our Constitution. I mean, the grand jury is kind of a fourth branch of government. It's to allow the citizens to be able to present evidence of crimes that then should be dealt with by other citizens without having to go through gatekeepers. That is not happening. We can't be assured that it will happen either with the information that Barbara has indicated on the anthrax that's been delivered. We certainly hope, I think it's worth to keep trying. But part of the discussion on Saturday, as I understand it, is going to be for people to weigh in on this. Right. They will be able to say whether there are things that we should be devoting our time to that we're not, how important this is. I personally believe that we are doing a lot of important things. We need more resources in which to do them, more attorney time for certain. Our beleaguered staff does not have enough, or I shouldn't say staff, our litigation director does not have enough time and resources in which to do everything. So that's my 2 cents to close.
One thing I want to commend everybody on, because we are getting close to the end here, there are a number of different, let's say these committees have brought together people of various ideological stripes, and we don't all necessarily agree politically, but these issues surrounding 9/11 are certainly something that we can agree upon. And I don't want to irritate anyone, but I do want to ask a question that I think might challenge Barbara, because I believe I know how she feels about this. But Barbara, and again, I'm not trying to get you in a gotcha moment. And you don't have to answer this. It's my belief that you were not a big fan of President Donald Trump or his presidency. But just recently, he made a comment, I think it was at his golf tournament, or the Saudi golf tournament, actually, that he said that they haven't solved 9/11 yet. And the mainstream news balked at this.
That now.
Well, but the mainstream said that Trump is an idiot for saying that. How do you feel about that comment?
No, he's not an
Trump?
idiot. Remember, at I think it was the first or second Republican primary debate to see who was going to be the Republican candidate in 2016, with a single sentence, Trump basically closed down the Bush dynasty. Jeb Bush was running, and he was trying to tout. Jeb Bush was trying to, governor of Florida, brother of George W. Bush. He was trying to tout, what great things his brother, President George W. Bush, had done. And Trump said, well, I don't think that's so great. I mean, 9/11 happened on your brother's watch. And that was it for the Bush.
He's right. But he's right about this as well. And the reason I brought this up, the reason I bring this up is that this
he's right about it, but he didn't do anything about it when he was president. And that's when it mattered.
It did. But he was quite hampered as president, in part by Bill Barr, who obviously was running interference for the Bush family. The thing that's interesting about this Live golf tournament is that this thing was backed by Mohammed bin Salman. And without making any kind of judgment about the complicated things that all of these various people get involved in, it does seem like there is a fracture in the Saudi Arabian royal family where on one side is Mohammed bin Salman and his allies, and on the other side appears to be Al-Walid bin Talal and his allies. And Al-Walid famously offered Rudy Giuliani $1 million or something like that after 9/11. A lot of people think Al-Walid might have been involved in some way. You're shaking your head. What do you say about this?
Oh no, I'm just going, oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Wow.
Yeah, let's not forget that the Crown Prince bin Salman, I mean, he literally kidnapped and put all of his rivals in basically prison in the Ritz Hotel in Riyadh until they gave up all their money and promised not to run against him or something like that.
Do you remember when that occurred? It wasn't about running against him.
Unfortunately, I put my money on bin Salman.
I do as well. And do you remember when that occurred? Al-Walid was one of the people imprisoned in the Ritz-Carlton. This was very shortly, I think it was early November 2017, shortly after the Las Vegas shooting. People who watch John Cullen Investigates have seen the amazing evidence that he has produced about the Saudi Arabia National Guard and the helicopter fleet that they maintain in Mesa, Arizona. So there's a lot that hasn't been exposed about 9/11, about the Saudi Arabian royal family and the Bush family's willingness to protect them. So I hope that people will stay in touch with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and Richard Gage, 911.org. People are going to want to tune in to the symposium this Saturday. And if anybody has any final words, I invite you to just chime in. We're just about at the end of our hour here.
Well, and we hope that you generously donate to the Lawyers Committee. The way to do that is to go to our website, lcfor911.org, and your donations will go entirely to the legal work of the Lawyers Committee. And now Richard will, I'm sure, let you know how to donate to his organization.
Yes, and be sure to come to the events this weekend. Again, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, who I'm not with anymore, but they still do great work. That's Friday, September 9. September 10 is the Lawyers Committee event. Come there. It's free. September 11th is the San Francisco Film Festival honoring David Ray Griffin and having James Corbett. That starts at 10 a.m.
Richard, you misspoke. I believe you said San Francisco Film Festival.
I always do that because it started out that way. It's the 9/11 Truth Film Festival. Thank you, Barb. So there's a lot going on, and we're doing this so people can become aware of the truth about 9/11 and bring your friends to these events so that we can help you wake them up, educate them, inform them about what's really going on around them. So that's why we're here, and that's why we do what we do. We're trying to make the world a better place, essentially. And we can't do it without you guys. Don't sit on your hands. Do something. Send the link, richardgage911.org, to every architect and engineer that you can find and everybody else that you know. And also send lcfor911.org to every lawyer in your community. And maybe some of them will come and help Mick Harrison with some of this load and help Bruce Lichty with some of this load that is burdensome but needs to be done. We have opportunities to have successes in the courts. So don't let us down.
And we'll
Yeah.
hear from Bruce. Final words.
He's gone.
Oh, is he
Oh,
gone?
we lost Bruce.
Did we lose Bruce? Okay.
Sorry about that, Bruce. Well, anyway, it's been wonderful to have each of you, and I think it is amazing. Anybody who had any questions about the legal victories that the committees have achieved prior to this interview, I think now has been set straight. I hope that people will attend the online events and also financially support the Lawyers Committee and Richard Gage. Don't forget you can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I've got some special 9/11 broadcasts coming up as well, so stay with us for that. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined us today, and thanks everybody for watching. Have a great night.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.